Hello to all my people, and if you're watching live, checking us out on YouTube, or listening on your favorite podcast provider, you are most definitely my people. Welcome to another episode of Botched, Bots, and Share Shots. I am your host, a chef by trade and a mark by choice. I am the Will Gray, and joining me tonight is a graduate of the Black and Brave Wrestling Academy, the son of pro wrestling. He is Vincent Michaels. Vincent, thanks for coming on Chat About Some Wrestling, brother. How are you?
I'm great, man. Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm excited to have you. One thing about this that I like the most is it's the same conversation, but every time I have it, it's totally different from person to person. And one of the things I always like to start with is somebody's origin story. I always say I grew up in that late 80s, early 90s push in the American Southeast. So I saw the end of the heyday of the NWA going into WCW. What about you? What did you grow up watching? What do you remember being exposed to as a young wrestling fan?
So I like to consider myself a historian in the sense of, even though I only got into watching wrestling in 2006, I really have tried to do my homework going back and watching a lot of, stuff, even besides the obvious you think of from 90s back to the 80s. I go back, I watch a lot of territory stuff. I love WCCW. I love that old Texas wrestling. I love watching random stuff I can find from Puerto Rico. Which is ironic because we just had that great weekend of shows at SmackDown and Backlash. But yeah, it started 2006. Um, Ironically enough, my origin into wrestling was playing the video games and not knowing as a little kid that these people in the video games were actually real. I thought that like any superhero, like a Batman or a Spider-Man, I thought that all these characters were just, colorful characters that are made up from storybooks, comic books, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then a year after I was playing the video games, my uncle decided to ask me, because he knew I was a pretty big fan of horror movies at the time, if I was a fan of the Boogeyman, just like as a horror icon. I was like, yeah, I love the Boogeyman. And he's like, what if I told you he was a wrestler? And I was like, what? And then he showed me an episode of Friday Night SmackDown. It might have been the first episode on Fridays. I can't seem to remember that exactly, but the rest was history.
So, as you decided, okay, you woke up one day and you're like, this is what I want to do for a living. Before we get to Black and Brave, what was your getting into the training process? Did you go straight to the academy? Did you start somewhere else and transition over? What was that process like right before you got into Black and Brave?
So I've been wanting to train and wrestle my entire life, as long as I can remember since I started watching. I never had any other career aspirations. I did art as a hobby, things like photography and the like for a long time, but everything, all of those smaller interests all ended up translating into wrestling one way or another. If I did an art piece at school, it involved wrestling. If I did music composition of any sort, it was trying to come up with a theme song. Lighting for theater, I would concept pay-per-view stages and that sort of stuff. And so really when it came down to it, yeah, I went to college and got a degree, but it was kind of just like to appease my family in a way. I always knew that wrestling was really my only option in life, no matter what it is. I mean, preferably in the ring, but just any facet of being in the business was is always still the goal. And so when the pandemic hit, I was put in a position that I hadn't been in for a long time, where all of a sudden I can't go to shows. And for anyone that might already know my story, I've been traveling to shows around the country and the world since I was a teenager, and being put in that position where I had nothing to do with myself and I'm just working a normal job. I was very gracious to have a job that kept me going through the pandemic, money making wise. But not being able to travel or buy tickets to anything, I was saving a lot of money. And my girlfriend at the time, she kind of had the realization of like, what, if you're going to go and you're going to be serious and you're going to do this, and the time to do it is now, because when else are you going to have this free time to really prepare yourself mentally, physically, not worry about the other aspects of what my life was, like the traveling and the sort. And to really put my priorities in order. And it was like, well, if I'm going to go to any school in the world, it's just, it had to be Black and Brave. I had looked into other places. I had looked into into Lance Storm's school up in Calgary. Just because I don't know, it's Lance Storm, and I was always a big Lance Storm fan growing up when I started getting into the histories of ECW and WCW, and but as far as mainstays in wrestling today, who I thought was going to be by far the best coach for me, it had to be Seth Rollins. It just had to be.
When you look at the style of training, let's dive into Black and Brave. Seth he's one of those guys that they call him a generational talent. He's made for pro wrestling. He's got it. A lot of people say those things about him. When you're in the room with him and you're training with him, what's he like hands on, from your perspective as one of his students?
So it's interesting because at the time I went to the school, there were two very big things that had changed in recent years compared to past classes. They had just started going back on the road because this was the end of 2021, post, pandemic Thunderdome shows and everything. So not only was he on the road a lot more than he typically was in prior years, there were also a lot more bizarre ways of that they were doing touring that they hadn't done in a long time. Like they were randomly going to England for like 2 days in the middle of like October. And it's like just patterns of going places around the country and world that they hadn't done because everything was still so out of whack for them. So he wasn't around nearly as much as I've been told he was in the past. And don't get me wrong, he was still around the school plenty and was happy to give us instructions when it was needed, and always was there to take questions and give feedback. But as far as actually in the ring training, at that time it was handled a lot more by Merrick Brave, of course, his former tag team partner on the indie scene. And him, I have to shout out Matt Mayday, who was another wonderful third party coach with everything, and of course all the other graduates that stick around and help with demonstrations and showing us how to do things properly and safely. And it's just a whole system of just real professional people in and out, even when you take Seth Colby out of the equation.
So you've had a chance working with those guys. Both of them had successful, stellar indie careers. We've talked about Seth. When you look at stylistically training wise, they had such a career in the indies and they've had successes on television. Do they have a focus? Are they centric on one way or the other? Do they train really heavy for house shows? Do they train for TV? Do they just try to give you the best rounded education they can?
They really try to be rounded because trying to think how I can word this as best as possible. I think I've had a really unique experience living on the East Coast of the United States versus training out in the Midwest, because the way I was trained was not very oriented into the way a lot of people learn to work out in the New York, New Jersey, like this area of the country. It's a lot faster. It's a lot less story based. Not that people here don't tell stories, but it's a lot more about the moves than it is what you do in between the moves. And people have very successful careers telling stories that way, including my coach when he got to WWE, and that's what a lot more of his style kind of turned into versus, him on the indies. But, at the school, they try to give us a lot more of just it's very simple, very basic, but it's also very nuanced. It's like when you get in here, it's not just about learning to do things at certain times. It's about what you do right after that fact. When you've got those 2 seconds right before you do something, make sure you maximize that, whether it's the way you look at a person. If you're making eye contact with someone in the crowd, what are you trying to convey to them before you do something? A lot of those little nuanced things that I don't think people pay attention to them nowadays, but I think there's just so much wrestling content out there. It kind of gets lost in the shuffle because you're trying to absorb so many different styles of work than have ever been available because everything's on social media, everything's on a streaming platform. If you're not looking at every type of wrestling out there, then it's just as a worker, I think a lot of people are losing the ball.
So looking at it now, you kind of brought up social media from somebody who's broke into the business. Say we're looking from that 2019, 2020 range through now. Somebody who broke into the business in that territory of wrestling, so to speak. Do you feel like you guys have an edge because of social media, because your presence is so readily available for everybody to see? Whereas 25 years ago, 30 years ago, they were still taking VHS tapes to promoters to try to get booked. Do you think you guys have a little bit of an edge because of the instant gratification of social media now?
There's an edge in the grand scheme of things. I really don't think I help it. I think it hurts the business more than it helps it. I think you've got a lot of guys that go viral because they did one cool thing one time, and then it kind of turns into a situation where you're all of a sudden booked with the sole expectation of doing that cool thing to pop an audience, which is a trouble because it's been seen online in theory by a lot of people already at that point because social media can be so widespread. So it makes things actually less special than they used to be. And then you're booking people solely on the merit of, well, you can do this one really impressive thing, but you may not know a lot about someone else as a performer, as a personality. You know, if I go out there and I manage to do, I don't know, a 6:30, and a few promoters decide they want to book me because, hey, that 6:30 looked really cool. Let's say I spent 2 months getting that 6:30 down every single time, and man, it's the prettiest 6:30 outside of Ricochet and wrestling. That's still not how I should be getting bookings. I should be getting bookings because I go out there and sure, I'm supposed to have an appeal and I'm supposed to be something that can help sell tickets and add to the presentation of a show. But I don't think that using moves as a way to sell your product is the way wrestling should be conducted. I think it should be about the characters, and I think it should be about the way those characters tell their stories. If I have a character, oh, sorry, if I have a character that can go out there and do these unprecedented feats of physical wonder that helps tell a story and isn't just there to be there and pop a crowd, then I think that it's a lot more reasonable to book based on those merits. Perfect case in point. Someone who's been very helpful to me. I just want to give him a quick little shout out. Speedball Mike Bailey. You know, he's someone that's helped me so much learn about the in betweens of things while also being a complete spectacle of a performer. You know, he does things that people have no idea how he's able to do them. But when people think of Mike Bailey, they don't just think about the moves. They think about everything he is as a presentation, as an appearance, as a character. And it's like those are the kind of people that I want to model myself after now that I'm in the business.
And he's had a hell of an indie career. Like, and a super cool story. I don't want to tangent off about Mike Bailey. This is about you, but Mike Bailey's story is cool as shit. Like an amazing story for coming into the business. You mentioned something earlier. You said that you were a bit of a historian. You've gone back, you've rewatched stuff from the 90s, you've watched stuff through where we're at now in 2023. As a historian, do you also feel like you're a student of the game? Do you watch as much tape now as you did when you first started wrestling?
So, I mean, I've been watching tape even as just a fan long before I even conceived of the fact that it would help me, you know, now that I'm a wrestler. And by the same token, um, even just going to shows for as long as I have and getting that in-person experience and seeing how people do a certain thing on a live event versus television, little things like that, I think my brain has subliminally absorbed even without realizing that that's what I needed at that time. I'll go in the ring and I'll just kind of do things and people will be like, you think about those things and you're only like a year in the business, like that's almost unheard of. And it's like, I don't mean to. I think it's just I've absorbed more than the average wrestler because I've had the unique experience of traveling for so long, going to shows, talking to so many wrestlers long before I was a wrestler myself. But when you're talking about tape studies, you know, I do try to go back and look a lot more at the past than I do the current product, especially now, because I think people can just be so absorbed in, like I said, there's so many styles of wrestling, but I think a lot of little nuanced things have gotten lost in today's wrestling. It's like, right, if I want to really learn about working audiences, I'll go back and watch NWA, and I'll go back and watch, New Japan in the 80s, and I'll go and watch, Cactus Jack and Vader from WCW, just these things that at the time were so unconventional before they became the norm. Because I really think we're getting to a point where there's very little left to find that's new. I think this wheel is getting harder and harder to reinvent as time goes on in the present. So the only way to learn is to go back in the past, in my opinion.
Something you've mentioned, and I appreciate a good guest who can give me my segues ahead of time, was your character work. One of my favorite analogies I've ever heard a trainer give me was he talked about when he would teach his students to turn things up from their own personality in their everyday life, turn it up to 11, to draw your best character, be the best parts of yourself. A lot of those cliches, whether you think they're cliches or not, is just,
Sure.
What about you? Are you turning up to 11 when you stepped in the squared circle from your day-to-day life? What about you turned up to 11?
Um, can I curse on here?
You absolutely can. I have the E for a reason. You can say whatever the hell you want.
Okay. I mean, really, I'm a fucking prick.
I
Really.
appreciate that.
Um, and a lot of people are surprised when they hear me say that because people think that I'm very easygoing, happy to talk to, never the kind of person that's going to be like, "Hey, get the fuck away from me. I don't want to talk today." I'm always eager to talk. I'm always eager to have conversation. But at the end of the day, I'm somebody that realizes that I'm in the position I'm in for a reason, and just because I give people the leisure of talking to me doesn't mean that I'm not going to have my own ulterior motives for why I converse with people in a certain way. Like, I'm very gracious to you for giving me this exposure today and this platform to speak and promote myself. And I'm not saying I wouldn't want to talk to you if you were just some guy on the street, but there's always a method to the madness about why you do certain things and how you choose to present yourself in certain avenues. And I feel like, going out there in front of people with the sole intention of ruining their day or night or anything of that sort is only going to benefit them, because in this world of instant gratification, you can't have that moment of heroes triumphing if someone like me doesn't get out there and make your life a living hell before that hero vanquishes me, or at least attempts to. You know? So whenever I go out to the ring, my mentality is, if this good guy, if this baby face is going to make a comeback on me, if he's going to fire up, I'm going to get as much fire out of this guy as I fucking can. I'm going to do everything in my power, whether the people think it's cool, uncool, whatever. I'm going to make sure that when it's time for him to fire up, the people want to see me get my ass kicked. And I think it's very lost on people in wrestling today, the notion of being cool, being edgy. I don't give a shit about that. I'm out here to be me, and I'm out here to be the best version of myself. And if people choose to rock with that, great. And if they don't, well, you can fuck off anyway. Because at the end of the day, you're not supposed to like me.
Hearing that makes my old school heart happy, because those are like some of the old school like heel tactics that you hear some of those old heads talk about, man. Like it's nice. It makes my heart happy to hear people still living that life.
Oh
Let's
yeah.
talk about it. You're standing behind the curtain, your music comes on, you're getting ready to walk through, and that crowd's gonna hit. Describe for the listeners who might not be familiar with your work, who is the son of wrestling, Vincent Michaels?
The son of wrestling is a guy that grew up in the world of wrestling and hates it. I hate where wrestling is turned into, and I hate that so many people get into wrestling now and they look for a handout, and they want the business to give them something that it gave them when they were a child, or it gave them in their upbringing. Like, you're always searching for that thing that brings you back, that reminds you of why you got into wrestling. That shit don't work for me. People that look for a handout, I think shouldn't be in the business. I am wrestling. Wrestling didn't make me who I am today. I am in wrestling to make it what it is today. Wrestling isn't going to make me a different person. Vincent Michaels is going to make wrestling different than what it is today. You know what I'm trying to say here?
I like it. It's
Yeah.
that
And
that
and, and when it comes down to it, I'm bigger than wrestling. You know, I am bigger than the world of wrestling because I'm the center of the wrestling universe, and that's where the sun comes in.
Let's talk about your territory work. You've had a chance to work in, you've talked about it all the way up in New Jersey and stuff like that, pro wrestling magic. You get up into that area of the country, you get into Johnny Rod's territory. It's PJ Savage, Jay Bougie, the Vinny Pacificos of the world. New York, New Jersey has a very distinct style of wrestling. You kind of touched on it a little bit. What was it like for you the first time you walked into that territory? And because people talk about it, New York, New Jersey, that Philly, that area of the country has a very distinct feel when you wrestle in that territory. So what was it like for you the first time you stepped foot there?
Very tough. Very tough because if I can describe the way that a lot of us are trained out at Black and Brave, I'd have to equate it most to that real old school Mid-South style if I just had to put one frame of reference to it. And really, I mean, like I said, they try to make it well-rounded, but if I had to put a term to it, I'd call it Mid-South. And so the first time I worked with someone, bless him, I can't think of his name right now. First time I worked with someone out here in the Northeast that asked me, "Hey, bro, what are your combos?" I'm like, "The hell are combos for?" And when you do a one thing and then it leads into another, and then you finish off with a third, and you do things in threes and fours, and I'm like, "I don't do that." That's like, well, then how do you get cheered? Well, how do you get over? I'm like, beat the shit out of you. Like, I, um, and people have tried to get me to assimilate, and I do enough to get by to where people don't think I'm boring or anything like that. But at the end of the day, I do think it's an advantage to learn in a style that is not the norm out in this part of the country. So when I go and I kind of slow things down a little bit, and it's time for those baby faces that do all the cool combos and springboards and everything you can think of, great, because now I'm maximizing their potential. That's all I can ask for when I get into a ring, because I want the people out there, I want them to feel something, you know? And if they feel the same way about me, if I do the same cool moves as the babyface, then what the fuck is the point? That's not wrestling, in my opinion.
You're once again, I'm just sitting here shaking my head because I'm like, hell yeah. Like preach. Keep talking. Let's move down the East Coast a little bit. Talk Deadlock Pro now. Those guys are infamous for bringing, and notorious and huge. They've got great international relationships, both in Japan and all over the wrestling world. What's it like when you have a chance to go into a locker room and work with international talent now?
Well, I haven't got to work as a talent yet for Deadlock. I'd hope in the future I can get to. I've done a lot of crew work for them. I've done a lot of their production, a lot of behind the scenes stuff with I have to shout out my buddy Xander, who is the head of their production. So if you ever want to look for the person to go to when you think about, man, Deadlock has those really cool stages that set up for an indie that you're like, that's like next level type stuff. Xander from Ray's Lighting is who to shout out for that, and he's been very gracious to let me come along with him on trips to North Carolina and help out Deadlock and all that fun stuff. But just even being in a locker room still at the same time with international talent, it's such a fun experience because even if I'm not on a show with people, just hanging around and watching people put stuff together and kind of get a feel for, you know, they understand that they can't do things the way that they may do it back in their homeland or at their home base, whether it's Japan, Mexico, the UK, anywhere international that has a different flavor than American style. it's so interesting to see how people make those translations to making things palatable for an American audience, because sometimes you do have to slow down a little bit. Sometimes you got to speed up. Sometimes you got to just throw shit out there and see what sticks and see if the people can rock with it. And the thing about Deadlock is that these people are they're the real hardcores. They're out there watching all the content of Emi Sakura and any other, Japanese female you can think of that they've brought in to work for them. And, when they're out there, it's like, it's just a different level. It's such a great variety of young talent, established names, international star power. And I think that's why Deadlock has quickly risen up as one of the prominent indies in the country. They just did their first show up here in New Jersey. They just went over for a very successful tour of Japan. I'm so happy for those guys, and they're just getting the ball rolling. But I think the sky's the future when you talk about these big traveling indies now, like the GCWs and of that sort.
So this has become one of my favorite questions to ask. And once again, it's very similar to the origin stories because I asked the same one, but everybody has a very distinct answer to it. I want you to go back to day one, night one, match one. What advice would you give Vincent on the night of match one?
Um, oh man, that's really tough. I don't want to give you any dead air here.
No, this is
Um,
one of my favorite parts about it is because everybody has this look on their face. They're like, damn, that's a great question. And, I hang my hat on it. I like that one.
Take in the moment, because I found out, I want to say maybe 20 minutes before I went out, that I was having my first match. And not that it wasn't the coolest thing of my entire life, but I think I was so hamstrung about getting it done and over with, just from the sake of, like, it's now or never. You're either gonna do it or you're not, and now it's like you're gonna do it. There's no going back. But there were so many nerves. There was so much of an eagerness, but not in a good way. It was like, oh man, I really just want to get out there and get this like fucking over with, because I'm so anxiety filled. I wish I had taken it in a bit more. I wish I would have really stopped and taken a nice breath and like thought about the fact that I was going out and living my dream for the first time. And I can't even tell you the last time I was really nervous to have anything resembling a match. When it comes to just that feeling of just going out there and not knowing how the people are going to respond. And even going to new states now that I've been traveling a lot more, and I'm going to new territories where people have never heard of me, don't know me from a hole in the wall. It's still so much easier. It's just, you know what, I'm going to go out, I'm going to do my thing, and the people, they're going to give me what I want, because I know what I'm going to give them. It's just, you just know.
All right, Vincent. This is everybody's favorite part. I always end with 5 random questions that have absolutely nothing to do with wrestling. I've got your 5 queued up. You ready?
All right.
What's your hype song? What's your go-to song on your playlist when you're getting ready for a match?
For a match, oh man. Um, Stone Cold's theme from 1996.
The glass
The
breaks
the,
and
the
all
very
hell
the,
breaks loose.
the very first version of it, where it's got him talking trash in the middle of it, because sometimes I need to remind myself to talk trash more, and so it actually gets me psyched up for the idea of talking while something is playing. Like if my theme music's going, I still have that okay to like talk to fans and yell at people while I'm doing my entrance. I'm not just, tunnel vision going ahead, not acknowledging people.
Question number 2. What was the last movie you watched?
Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street. My favorite movie of all time.
That's a great pick. I like Johnny Depp. There's very few things that man has done that I'm just like, it just wasn't for me. I like it.
You gotta slit some throats sometimes, especially in this business.
For sure. That's the perfect. I'm clipping the shit out of that. Are you a cat person or a dog person?
I've had several cats and dogs my whole life. We have 6 cats right now, so I guess I have to be a cat person. Oh, and we're in the dark, and we're back.
I have 5 cats in the house right now, so I feel that. I was never a cat person until now. This was an either or question, or a would you rather. Would you rather never get hungry again or never get thirsty again?
Never get hungry because it's so much easier to have abs when you're not hungry.
And final one, number 5. What's your favorite food?
If I'm trying to be healthy, boneless spare ribs with vegetable fried rice, and if I'm not being healthy, barbecue chicken pizza.
Any pizza for me, hands down. All right, Vincent, this is the part. I don't have to say anything. Just tell everybody where to find you, what you've got coming up. Put yourself over. Tell everybody your socials.
All right, well, this is the son of wrestling, Vincent Michaels. If you see the hand symbol, if you see the face, then you know it's me, Vincent Michaels, on any and all social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. If anyone's out there who wants the son of wrestling to come to your state, your Providence, your town, hit up your local promoters. I am willing to travel anywhere and everywhere. I'm currently based out of northern New Jersey. And if you want to see me, come do what I do best, and that is shine bright and put on a show for everybody involved, then hit me up, hit up your local promoters. And if you ever run into me in person at a wrestling show, at a WWE show, an AEW show, come up to me, let's talk, let's take a picture. And hey, this is just the beginning, you know. I'm only a year in, and I'm already making my debut in several states across the country, and I got some big stuff lined up, so stay tuned.
Excellent. Vincent, man, I appreciate you coming on and chatting about some wrestling with me, brother.
I appreciate you, man. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. For the son of wrestling, Vincent Michaels, I am the Will Gray. Thanks for stopping by and listening, my people.